So we have a major development happening with the story of the Coutts Four, four men who are political prisoners here in Canada. Now, joining me today, I have two amazing guys that have been working on this story. One is a filmmaker known as the Amazing Zoltan on Twitter, and the other one, Gord, who writes for Newsweek. And I'd love to bring these guys in right now. Welcome to the show, guys. Thank you so much for joining me, especially with this breaking news.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Clyde. Pleasure.
Yeah, so first and foremost, Zoltan, as you're known on Twitter, you've been putting together these films, and one of them in particular was about this case, the Coutts Four. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I started this project, but I couldn't have done it without Gord's printed material through Newsweek, as well as Mocha. We got to give a big shout out to Mocha Bazurgan Media, the best media company in Canada, because he's been covering this story from day one. So there have been other people on this story for sure, and deserve a lot more.
And Mocha, God bless him, shows up to Lethbridge for all the pretrial hearings. And at one point, they had the first two rows of the courtroom reserved for media, and he would be the only one sitting there. And then they eventually got rid of those two front rows because nobody else was showing up. So yeah, thank God for Mocha Bazurgan.
Wow, yeah. And Gord, you've been writing for Newsweek. You've been on Ingram, the Ingram Report. You've also been on Tucker Carlson to talk about this story. Not a lot of people bringing a lot of information forward. This has been kind of a cryptic story in Canada of these four guys being held in remand. This isn't real jail. This isn't real prison or anything like that. This is no charges being laid on, or no charges yet laid. They didn't even get a bail hearing for the longest time.
No trial and no bail. They did have charges laid against them. That's why they ended up there, but they were denied bail in a country where everybody gets bail. Rapists, violent criminals, drug dealers, child molesters, sex pests. Everyone in Canada gets bail, but not these four guys who had no criminal charges and were otherwise upstanding citizens just exercising their rights to peaceful protest.
I want to have you both on to discuss this in further, because this case is just, you can't really sum this up in a short period of time. Hopefully in the next coming weeks, we can have you guys on for a longer episode to talk about this. But what's the breaking news today? Because I hear that two of the guys have been released, and what's the circumstances surrounding this?
So two have been released today, Chris Lysak and Jerry Morin. And they've been released on a plea deal. So they have pled guilty to two lesser charges. The larger charge, so I just want to correct you a little bit. When you say like they haven't been in prison, they've actually been in something worse than prison. It's a form of purgatory called remand. So in remand, you have no rights. You don't even have the rights of a regular prisoner. And the reason that they've been held in this pretrial custody, which has also had some Gord, you fumbled on this on Tucker Carlson as well. Solitary confinement.
Right. Jerry Morin and Tony Oleanek, because of the sort of, they get bounced around between different remand centers. And because of this, the conditions of this purgatory and the sort of rules of different remand centers, and then rules about being anywhere near their other co-accused, sometimes they just end up getting stuck in solitary confinement. Like I think in the case of Jerry Morin, he was in solitary confinement for almost 80 days. And in most parts of the world, solitary confinement is considered a form of torture. So Jerry Morin, who thank God walked free today, 80 days in solitary confinement out of his nearly 2 years behind bars, having no bail and never been convicted of a damn thing.
So it's interesting. What I do understand is that if you're serving time in remand and you get time served, they count it as double what you would normally have in jail because of these conditions that you're talking about. So these men would have been, each one of them, 4 years in jail if you count time served to this case. Now, Gord, what are the circumstances surrounding their release I'm hearing about what do you call it?
It was a plea deal, and there's some murky business going on in the background with this, because there was going to be applications made at the pretrial hearings this week about dirty business on the part of the RCMP and the Crown and their evidence. Basically, the applications would have been having a lot of that evidence dismissed because, warrants that didn't stipulate certain things that were seized, claims to wiretap communications that weren't actually recorded and were based on notes. So the RCMP and the Crown didn't have their shit together. And it's my contention, this is just my opinion, they took advantage of these gentlemen and their tender psychological condition after having been locked up for 2 years, and at the last minute offered them a plea deal. Now, the thing we need to remember here, and this is like the zoomed out, this is where it gets political, is that after they were arrested in February of 2022, they were charged with conspiring to murder police officers. That's pretty serious business.
Mm-hmm.
What did the Crown just drop today? They just dropped those charges. There has never been one shred or iota of evidence of any of that, and the Crown just proved it today. Like, if they actually had a case against them on that charge, they wouldn't have waited for 2 goddamn years to get around to it, and they wouldn't have dropped it. So the whole conspiring to murder police officers was a fantasy that was concocted to legitimate Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act. And if you look at Justice Rouleau's conclusion at the Public Order Emergency Commission, and he said he reluctantly allowed that Trudeau was within his right to invoke the Emergencies Act based on these accusations in Coutts. Well, guess what? The accusations were fucking vaporware. There was nothing to them. These guys just did 2 years in jail for nothing to make Trudeau's invocation of the Emergency Measures Act look good. And there was nothing to it. It was all a lie. So after today, and then later this month, when hopefully Tony Oleanick and Chris, the other Chris gets out, Chris Carbert, hopefully we start asking some questions about what went on here. There needs to be commissions, inquests. These guys were locked up for political reasons, and I called them political prisoners in my Newsweek articles for a reason. It was all about politics. You look to politics in Canada, the Conservative Party didn't lift a finger to help these guys. Conservative media didn't lift a finger to help these guys. There was a conspiracy of silence around this because it makes Canada look really goddamn bad to have political prisoners. Mm-hmm. And what did the Crown just do today? By offering these guys this plea deal and dropping the main, most violent charge against them as if it never even happened, means that it was, in fact, political motivated imprisonment.
So if they pled out, that means that they pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. Zoltan, do you know what the charge is that they did plead to?
So I can provide a little bit of insight here. Ironically, I am getting it from the CBC. So take that for what you will.
You should feel dirty for even saying that.
It's probably wrong if I had to take a guess, but from what I've heard through the CBC, Jerry Morin, this is quite outrageous. He pled guilty to conspiracy to potentially traffic a firearm. So he said that he never actually moved a firearm. He just said to an undercover officer, as I understand it, that he would move a firearm if it was justified. So he has been held in remand for 2 years on what amounts to essentially a thought crime.
Wow,
and conspiracy itself is a thought crime. You're thinking about doing something. They accused you of thinking about doing something with other people. You never actually did it, and they never actually had any evidence that they were even thinking about doing it.
And I've spoken to some of the men in prison as well. Well, one, I spoke to Tony. Tony said, I couldn't tell you Jerry from Adam. This is when you knew that the conspiracy charges were completely absurd. Nobody knew Jerry. apparently Jerry had dropped off extra pairs of underwears, a weed grinder, and some hot dog buns to a barbecue.
That doesn't sound
Jerry,
doesn't sound like the things you bring to an insurrection of.
So here's Clyde. If I may, I interviewed Jerry Morin's wife, Jacqueline Martin, for my podcast. Right? You would think these four men who were basically charged with these extremely serious crimes, right? And those charges being the hinge on which the Emergency Measures Act was legitimated by Justice Rouleau, you would think perhaps that journalism would dictate that you talk to the people involved, ask them some questions. Why is it that the only person thus far that one of the family members of the Coutts Four talked to was me? Why was there no interviews with all of the big guys, the Globe and Mail, National Post, anybody, Jordan Peterson, you, anyone? Nothing. Me, truck driver, expat, I live in the United States.
And me, Zoltan.
And Zoltan. Where in the hell is the mainstream media? If these guys are the major criminals they say they are, there's a story here and radio silence from the mainstream media for 2 years.
Well, and that's really what's got me confused about this whole story. From what I understand, there's a publication ban on information getting out. But I would learn today from you, Zoltan, that the publication ban was on behalf of the defense, not on the behalf of the prosecutorial, the Crown. So this adds an extra shroud of what's going on with this situation. I think Canadians do deserve to hear what the real story is, because obviously two years, what amounts to 4 years in time served for a crime that's been dropped after all this time. Of course, with these lesser crimes being pled to.
As I understand it, the publication ban was brought on by the defense, and Gord can speak to this. The reason for that was that before there was any trial, or the charges had even started to dig their feet into the mud, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, in collusion with the mainstream media, had already deemed these men completely guilty in the court of public opinion, which Karima Saad, if you're familiar with her, has done a fantastic job. I interviewed her as well on documenting all of this in the Hategate documents, along with her partner, Eliza Hattigan. They've done a great job. So,
and that first publication ban was brought because the RCMP and the Crown, the evidence that they were leaking to the media and that the media was repeating was unsubstantiated allegations. And when the defense asked for this publication ban, it was the judge granted it because the judge knew that a bunch of the stuff the RCMP and the Crown were saying, there was nothing to back it. And what it was going to do was poison the jury pool. So that first publication ban was only on specific information regarding these allegations. You could still ask questions in the media. Why were these guys denied bail? How come 2 years later they're still in jail? You could ask the political implications. How come the pretrial hearings didn't get going until after the POEC? How convenient. All of that stuff that was public information and basic questions about a very politically charged case, you were still allowed to discuss and were not covered by the ban at all. The media still said nothing. They were trying to hide shit for the government. I'm telling you, this is a cover-up like you would not believe, man.
Well, and again, like I said at the beginning, it would be good to have you guys back so we can get into this in more depth, more detail, because this is a really, it's not a simple story. It's not cut and dry. No. It's not very easy. It all started with the Freedom Convoy in Coutts at the border crossing. And now 2 years later, we have two guys pleading out to get out of remand. And well, I mean, more is going to come out about this. One quick last question for both of you. Speculation on them pleading out. Does this limit their ability to seek legal retribution in the future, possibly sue the government, that kind of thing?
I don't know, but it seems quite likely that in taking these lesser pleas and pleading guilty, that's probably going to make it a problem for them to seek redress in the future. And maybe a tactically bad move for that. But you got to remember, 2 years in remand, no seeing your family, no nothing, no bail, no trial. These guys were in no psychological place to be negotiating plea deals. The government did this on purpose to avoid something else.
And that goes to the core of the story, Clyde.
Mm-hmm.
So whether these men were guilty or innocent of any of the crimes that they were accused of or even charged of, the double standard by which they were treated on, with especially regards to bail. We give bail to everyone in Canada. These men were held without bail for 2 years on what amounts to nothing charges. I mean, there's nothing there. And I think that's really the crux of the story.
I think
it's outrageous.
I'll have you guys back on again soon enough, because I really think we should put together a longer podcast to talk more in depth about this story. Where can people find you? The Amazing Zoltan, you're on Twitter, and as well as Gord. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter for now until I get thrown off again at Gord Magil. If not, autonomoustruckers.substack.com. And my podcast is called Voice of Gord. You can find it on all your major podcasting platforms.
Perfect. I'll make sure all the links are in the description down below. Thanks for joining me today, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Clyde.